Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion, Healthcare Data Breach Trends in 2022. And no, that's not a mistake. I know we're all, writing 2023 on our checks now. We're talking about the breach trends from 2022 so that it can illuminate what's happening in 2023. As people get into the room here, just a quick introduction. My name is Jake Melstein. I host all of the events for Critical Insight. We do this data breach report twice a year, and we've done it now for several years. And we have identified several trends that we're going to talk to you about today so that it can help you make smarter decisions about your network security. And it's interesting, as I look at folks in the room here, I know several of you, and one of the things that I can say is, so next week I'm going with Mike Hamilton, who's on the panel here, to the American Hospital Association Rural Conference. We're a preferred provider for the American Hospital Association. They only pick two for what we do, and we're one of the ones that they picked. So we're going to the conference next week, and I've now talked to three different IT directors, IT managers, and they're sharing a common problem. A common problem they're having is they recognize the need for better security, and they're having a hard time communicating to their boards, communicating to their CEO, or maybe not a hard time communicating, but a hard time getting through the needs here and the urgency around doing it. So hopefully this presentation today can help some of you do that. And we'll get forward. We'll get going here.
Don't you have there's a slick sheet on what boards of directors should be asking?
I do. That is true.
You want to give that away?
And I can give that away to folks.
Yeah.
I do have a one pager on that you can give a board or a CEO about the questions they should be asking about network security. I'm happy to give that away. Okay, things to know about the webinar. If you haven't been to one of our panel discussions before, know that the chat is on the right, and the chat is usually quite active. Hop in there right now. Let us know where you're joining from. The furthest person we've had join for any of our panel discussions this year is so far Sydney, Australia. My guess is since we invited all U.S. healthcare, there's not going to be anybody from Sydney, Australia. Okay. You can mute the chat if you want. There's a little bell. You can unmute the chat. And anybody who registered for this will get a recording of this. We'll also put it on our YouTube channel. So if you want to share it, it's easier to share from there. So who are we? Critical Insight defends critical services against cyber attacks. Half of our business is healthcare. We focus on a lot of rural health, rural hospitals, regional hospitals, and the like to help them defend against cyber attacks. How do we do it? We do it with the prepare, detect, respond methodology. We help organizations prepare for an attack. We help them detect an attack quickly, and we help them respond decisively to it. Now, joining the panel today, Mike Hamilton, who is founder and CISO. He's the former CISO of the city of Seattle. Fred Langston, who has done healthcare cybersecurity for many years. He's also he and Mike founded the company, and Fred's our chief product officer. John Delano will join a little bit later. He was having some technical difficulties. He's a VP at Christus Health, former CIO in a bunch of different places, including Integris Health, and I'm the event host. My name is Jake. So we're the way we do this is we start with what's happening right now, because we can look back at the numbers from last year, but there are some urgent things that we want to talk about now. Then we're going to get to the numbers from last year with the breach report, and we'll do Q&A throughout. So if you have questions as we go or thoughts, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll bring them up here. So the first thing we want to talk about here is just in the last week, the NSA put out a warning about the North Koreans. Mike, can you tell people what the warning was here?
Sure. Well, the warning is they're coming after the health sector, which, I mean, to think about it, there's there's obviously, money involved because the North Korean operators are stealing money. That's what they're doing. And however our intelligence apparatus figured this out, I don't know, but they say the money's being used to fund weapons programs. And so they're looking for the lowest hanging fruit, knowing that hospital budgets are stretched already, that hospitals' main, in the health sector in general, its main mission is not to secure the network, it's to make sure that patient outcomes are desired. And so when you are investing in everything that you have to invest in to make that happen, there's not enough left over to really fund security. And this is known by these actors. And so they're going after the health sector, hospitals. And they, given the tactics there, and I think we're gonna do a dive into some of the tactics and what's shown up in the records breaches. But what they're talking about here is not stealing records, which is the whole thing about the data breach report. It's all about records and number of records and how they were stolen and things like that. This one's about extortion. It's about ransomware. So here come the North Koreans knocking down health sector networks, which just goes to show you there are countries and groups that don't have boundaries. They don't. And so they're going to look for the lowest risk, highest reward targets they can. That happens to be the health sector.
I mean, and it's frustrating to know that to know that a rural hospital, a regional hospital is up against a nation state. And the next slide here is about KillNet. Mike, can you tell folks about KillNet, and then Fred, let's talk about
So
being up against a nation state.
this is evolving. And so when the war in Ukraine started, first thing that happened was there was a lot of volunteers that said, okay, we're going to hack Russia. And so Anonymous and the Belarusian cyber partisans and the Ukrainian cyber army, there's a whole bunch of these groups, these activist groups, all got into it. And they really embarrassed Russia. They broke into the space agency, the propaganda ministry. They took over live TV and broadcast their own messages alongside Vladimir Putin doing a speech. This is all embarrassing, right, for the Russians. So, well, Russians have patriotic hackers too. And so they started to get together and they started doing denial of service attacks, right? Just flooding internet connections with so much traffic you couldn't operate. And there were some website defacements and things like that. But mostly things that we think of is script kiddie kinds of things. Well, this is evolving, and they're getting together with other groups. Remember, Russians have a very well organized criminal set of corporations, we can call them, and very patriotic people working for those organizations that are really stealing a lot of money are patriotic enough to jump over and lend their support to this group. And that is now starting to happen. So again, there are these groups that don't have boundaries. We see what Russia does in terms of targeting civilians. There's no reason to think that that's not going to proceed apace here.
And so, Fred, here we have, a hacktivist group going after healthcare. Before we had a nation state going after healthcare. One, as a defender of healthcare, one, does it matter who is coming after you? And two, why are they focusing on healthcare?
Well, it does matter in the sense that understanding what their objectives are will help you to defend yourself. Knowing that the North Koreans, their gross national product, the economy of North Korea is largely underpinned by hacking. They're not building all these intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are exorbitantly expensive programs to run. Based on anything that they're exporting in terms of manufacturing, they can barely even feed themselves. So this is money that is being basically funding their entire military program. So it is a key national strategic asset for them to go out and hack people for money. But then you talk about the Russians. There's probably 10 good motives for the Russians, from I want money to I want to inflict damage on a capitalist nation that is supporting our enemy. There is a myriad of reasons.
NATO,
why,
you're NATO. Mm-hmm.
Right. That they're going to want to come after us. But why healthcare? Well, it's simple because healthcare is seen as being an entity which will pay in most instances. It's unlike maybe a commercial business that is manufacturing. If they go out of business, it's tragic for the people that work there. But if a hospital goes down when patients are there, that is life threatening. So you have a higher standard that healthcare is being held to. And why a small hospital in Kansas or North Dakota? Well, because you are better funded and more likely to have cyber insurance than a small hospital in Buenos Aires or in some country in Africa or in maybe Southeast Asia. There are plenty of hospitals there, but they don't have the money, right, that you do. You will always, because you're an American entity, probably be better funded. Even our critical care hospitals, which are fighting for every dollar they can get, you're still going to be a target because you have more money than the other entities out there in the world, which would be attacked.
And a question there. So I was talking to a rural hospital in Idaho, and one of the questions they asked was, well, wait a minute, like how do they even know we exist?
Showdown,
right?
Everybody's exposure it's known what everybody has facing the internet. Showdown is only one tool. It's like Google. It goes and spiders the internet, but what it does is it finds services running that are facing the internet, how vulnerable they are, whether or not they're using default passwords. And you can tell Showdown, find me home routers with default credentials in Bulgaria, and it'll give it to you. So you're known.
Well, how about just going to Dun and Bradstreet?
Well, or that.
I mean, you could just go to any one of the business services and say, tell me every healthcare company in America. I don't spit out a list. I mean, the open source intelligence, you can't hide. There's certain, if you think you can hide, that is a misconception.
Yeah, we'll show you how Maltego works. I want to say one more thing about this KillNet group too.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we talk about the real outcomes that we want to avoid here, right? Definitely patient care, right, is top of the list for the health sector, but it's unauthorized disclosure of records, theft, extortion, and just disruption for the sake of disruption. This wiper stuff is starting to show up more and more now, right? So it looks like it's ransomware and your network is snuffed, and there may be even an extortion demand that comes out of the printer, or you get a phone call, something like that. You ain't getting your stuff back because it hasn't been encrypted. It has been destroyed. It's been overwritten. And this group right here is the one that's likely to be wielding that kind of stuff just to poke their adversary in the eye. So we poo-pooed these guys for a long time. They're coming up and they're dangerous.
Good. And with that, we will keep going here. So there are a couple of trends that have come up as we've done this for a number of years, and I want to talk about. Number one is we are now up to 1 in 3 hospitals has been hit by ransomware, business email compromise, and or PHI compromise. 1 in 3, and by the way, it's a mixed number because some have been hit by all of these. Obviously, if you're hit by ransomware, you most likely have a PHI compromise. If hit by business email compromise means either that somebody took over one of your O365 accounts and committed business email compromise, or somebody at your organization fell for a business email compromise. And Fred, we see this increasingly, that a vendor's O365 account is taken over. They email, they say, hey, here's a new routing number, and then somebody sends money.
You bet. So business email compromise, kind of an evergreen approach to stealing money, and it works. We unfortunately just dealt with a client that had over 6 months sent over $3 million out to what they thought they were paying a bill, only to realize that they've been sending it to a bad guy who had been camped in the middle of the email exchange between their vendor and themselves. So one of the things to keep in mind, the problem can be on your side. You can have a compromised email account. That's a worst case scenario because that that attacker is sitting on your network and probably watching everything that is going in and out and able to send what look like entirely legitimate emails that will not be stopped by SPF, DMARC, or DKIM records. If you do not have SPF, DMARC, and DKIM records set up for your own domain, people can then still spoof sending it from you and your vendors can still be subject to a phishing attack looking like it's coming from you. And of course, if your vendors are compromised, then it looks legitimate that it's coming from them, and they're still sitting, the bad guy, in the middle of that three-way conversation. So there's multiple ways that all these phishing and business email compromise attacks can happen.
Yeah, and then the other thing on here, and John Delano joining us now. Hospitals say ransomware leads to increased patient death rates. John, this is something we've suspected for a long time, but we're really seeing this now, unfortunately.
Yes, Jake, and my apologies for some technical difficulties here, but certainly, we can unfortunately see the impact of ransomware on patients, and certainly many stories out there about patient harm that's come as a result of these type of attacks.
Yeah, and Mike, you and I have examined a case. I think it's Alabama where a baby died, because there wasn't enough care. There wasn't care because of ransomware, right?
Well, there was the other thing too, where I think it was an insulin pump or some kind of anesthetic pump hit some kid with 5 times the dose. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a number of these. There's one that's missing here though, and I know we're kind of conflating records and ransomware here, but it's all part of the same, giant problem. Hospital in Illinois got extorted and then had to close. They shut down operations, and now folks in rural Illinois are driving 500 miles to find health care. That was it. That was the last straw. That's kind of what I'm worried about. Is it being there? There are so many things about the health sector that are not going right now, and you see that the losses they're taking are huge. You don't have to push them that much farther for them to tip over.
I think it's important to note that this is talking about increased patient death rates. While we're talking about specific examples, there was a child that was thought to have died because of a breach in Alabama. This is really talking overall. It's talking about the system being degraded. So if you have a degraded system and you cannot handle as many COVID patients that are coming in your front door, and you're having to transfer those patients or send them home, that is how you get increased patient death rates. So you may not be able to directly measure, the hack caused that person to die, but certainly these things are leaning and pressing the scales to where patient care is degraded and people are getting less care than they deserve, and frankly that can lead to higher patients.
And something that we predicted a long time ago, unfortunately, was foreseeable, and now appears to have come. So what we do twice a year is we look at the HHS breach portal, known by some as the Wall of Shame, one of our colleagues, Brett, pulls all of the breaches, all of the data from the last 6 months, and so that's what we're looking at when we look at this. And so when we look at the total breaches reported by half year, just as a guide through this, so here's 2020 first half, second half, 2021 first half, second half, 2022 first half, second half, right? Down here is a number of breaches, and up here is the individuals impacted. Besides anything else, you can see just the massive number of individuals, impacted by breaches. And you can see at 28.5 million, right now we are at the most records affected. So the second half of 2022 had the most records impacted since we've been doing the report. Now, and by the way, looking back in time, still the most, even before we were doing the report. But breaches are down. The number of actual breaches, you can see there's a bit of a decline here, even though records are up. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But John, thinking about the number of breaches coming down, folks shouldn't think, oh, this is getting better.
For sure, Jake. To me, it's a little bit bittersweet. You can look at the numbers and say, sure, the number of breaches has declined, even though it's it's still a high number. But to me, the bigger impact is the number of patients that are affected or the number of records that are affected. And we see that going up. And so, to me, it just means while breaches are declining, they're getting bigger.
Yeah, I mean, Fred, when you see this, you've been looking at these numbers too. How do you see this?
Well, it could be two things going on here. It could be they're looking and saying, I'm going to go for higher value targets with more records. I'm going to spend more time and effort mining those breaches and getting as much as I can. Or it could be it's just gotten harder and they've had to focus on wherever they do get a toehold and cloud as many records as they can from the places they do get it. So don't know if it's a better hacking a strategic approach or they're just being forced to be more effective in where the places that they're actually got a toehold.
Well, they're going after EMR systems now too.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's what I was going to say is going through
Yeah.
this. One of the big things that happened, and again, one of our old
There you go.
colleagues, a guy named Drex DeFord, who used to be at Children's Hospital in Seattle. He said this. I looked back at what we said in 2020, and he said, an EMR is going to get breached, and that's going to be a big, big deal. And he's right. So in 2022, that became a reality. And we're not talking about Epic here, but we are talking about 6 million records exposed through EMR breaches. Connection software is an EMR for pediatrics, and eye care leaders an EMR for eye care practices. Both had breaches. 6 million records total. Mike, you were part of that conversation a couple of years ago. The fact that EMRs got breached, surprise? Not a surprise?
Not a surprise. Not a surprise at all. In fact, so a couple of things. Didn't Oracle buy Cerner? And Oracle claims they want to be the one place where all health records are. Okay, fantastically bad idea. Fantastic, putting everything in one place means all you got to do is get to one place. But it's also it's not specifically EMR systems, although it was here. It's also parent organizations that are the kind of the umbrella over the provision of these records, right? And that's what Common Spirit was. And they have that network of hospitals, and including my hospital here in Silverdale, Washington, which was, I don't know if you read the story, the hospital that called 911 on itself. That's my place right down the road. And when Common Spirit was hit, their network of hospitals, nobody could get health record information at all. So, they're going after the systems that house the records, also the providers of the record service. So it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because their motivation here, which I still think is, to me, there are no records left to steal, right? I mean, they've all been stolen. We're all having free credit monitoring going on. All of our social security numbers are out. This is known. Okay. Your credit card can be bought online for probably $20. So this continuing huge focus on records does seem a little strange to me in the context of things like disruption, which would straight up kill people. They're monetizing these records somehow, and it's hard for me to believe that they're holding their value like this, but they seem to be holding their value. So going after EMR systems and providers of medical record services makes all the sense in the world.
And John, I mean, it's not like a hospital can say, hey, we're not going to have an electronic medical record system. You're not going to go back to all paper. So once you sort of have the realization that EMRs are going to have breaches, how do you think about that? What do you do about that?
Yeah, and certainly, EMR is probably the one of the top, if not the top, key application in a healthcare organization. So you're right. It's not going to go away. And certainly becomes a repository. One thing that we didn't mention, and or at least before I got on, certainly there's a move to get all of your data in one place because it's easier for patient care. It's easier for identifying trends and issues. We put all kinds of data in data lakes, and we do that because then we can ask a whole lot more questions and get a whole lot more answers. And so we just continue to see these records consolidate into bigger bigger things like data lakes and those type of things. So that's a concern.
Yeah, and Fred, I
Just to
mean,
add to what Mike said.
yeah, for sure. And Fred, a lot of organizations. I know somebody who I talked to at the Chime conference a couple of years ago said, I have to be able to trust my EMR provider. I'm going to go with the big ones and just be able to trust that they're not going to have a breach.
Yeah. So, and there's a bunch of challenges here. One is there are a lot of small regional healthcare organizations that have got together and pooled resources and share particular Epic installations, kind of a mini health exchange approach. So we're as Mike said, we're starting to consolidate all of our data in the same place. There could be a catastrophic breach that could lose tens, hundreds of millions of healthcare records in one broad sweep. If you get, say, one of these regional Epic installations, or a Cerner regional installation for a major hospital. I mean, it's like Fort Knox. Getting into Fort Knox and being able to steal everything.
You know what I would be worried about too, around EMR, and this has been in the back of my mind ever since the SolarWinds thing happened. So, Epic and Cerner really have the vice grip on, really it's Epic. And if their network was compromised and their code was compromised, and then continuing to send out updates of backdoored code, then we got the big problem.
So, and moving us forward here, the other big breach that caused the number of records to go up, even though breaches were down, was 3 million records exposed at Advocate Aurora Health because of the Metapixel data breach.
Oh yeah.
Fred, can you go through this one for folks?
I can at a high level. So basically, there's ad tracking software on patient portals that is watching what's going on whenever you're there. What are you using? Kind of functions are you using? Things like that. Well, this particular information was also being sent because it was running through Meta, right? The Meta Pixel tracker, watching what you're doing, is sending that information to Facebook. So essentially, where you're going, what you're doing, this thing is going, oh, Facebook, hey, here's what Fred Langston has been looking at. I don't know, here's a whole bunch of healthcare stuff he was looking at on his MyChart, Epic instance or something like that. So they take that information and they share that information for marketers, which you probably want to sell you one of the drugs that you see on your TV, 1,000 times a night these days. So
and so I was going to say, is this is this ransomware to shut down a hospital? No, but Mike, this has created a bunch of class action lawsuits. Right?
Yeah, this is and it was an accident, right? So the way it started was that the teams at hospitals, healthcare organizations, wanted better metrics on how their patient portals were being used. And sure, you can go look through logs and you can see what pages somebody hit, but it doesn't give you the detailed kind of information that the uber creepy tracking stuff from Facebook does. And so the marketing people at the hospitals went and talked to Facebook, and they go, yeah, we have this pixel technology that we can put on the page, and it will tell you how long somebody stays on a page, and whether or not that they were having difficulty finding something they were looking for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what they found out later that they didn't know, because I guess they didn't read the terms or something, was that pixel technology was picking off all kinds of protected health information and sending it over to Facebook. And what they do is they monetize that information and send it out to different kinds of brokers. So it turned into a real big mess really quickly. And yeah, if you're, having, heart problems, you're going to get directly marketed for a heart drug. And so when they found out, and it's not that many hospitals that were involved in this, or at least not that many that we know of, but yeah, they're immediately. So, the privacy statutes, California and elsewhere, have huge fines for unauthorized disclosure of not so much personal health information or protected health information, but privacy information. And so that they just pile on there. And that's why the class action suits are coming. So, you can expect much more of this in the Federal Trade Commission enforcing the False Claims Act. That falls on healthcare a lot. So, again, one of these events can push a health organization over the edge, and that's it.
Yeah.
And remember, this is just Meta, right? There are
Yeah.
dozens of other or not ad tracking, but activity tracking. When you're on a website, there's dozens of utilities that will do this. Almost every website you go to is probably instrumented with technology like this.
That's
So
what Jay
this
puts
could-
on our stuff, man. Stay away from our site.
This could be the tip of the iceberg. Right?
Thanks, Mike. It's always good when we do a panel discussion when Mike says, stay off our website. Thanks for
Marketing
that.
malware.
Okay, so seeing all that, it's clear that a breach from a business associate exposes more records, and so looking at this is so what you're looking at here is the numbers from the second half of 2022, and so you can see the percent of breaches from a healthcare provider, and then what percentage of records were released because of that. And clearly, when bad guys want to get a number of records, they are going after business associates more and more. And that has been a running theme now for quarter after quarter after quarter. And John, how do you, if you're sitting in the CIO seat, you really have to worry here about what's going on at your business associates.
Yeah, certainly. Jake, we're having more and more connectivity, more interconnected, particularly with our business partners, and outsourcing of functions to third parties, and that requires data exchange, and so there's just more opportunity there. And in most organizations, you're dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of business associates or business partners. And so, ultimately, if you had infinite resources, right, you would throw people at that. But that's just difficult to manage with that number of people. Because not only is it a one-time thing, but as we all know, technology changes, access requirements change, and so it's something that you have to maintain and go back and revisit those business associates and those third parties on a regular basis to ensure that nothing's changed.
Yeah, and let me just, in thinking about this, right? So more records are lost through business associates, okay? That doesn't mean that business associates possess the records that are stolen. To me, the way to interpret this is business associates, because by and large, they're smaller businesses than the covered entity and probably in a worse position to actually implement the right kinds of controls. Yet they have this network trust relationship with the covered entity, and that's being exploited. So when we say that these were caused by business associates, BAs are the unlocked window that they crawled through to get to the covered entity and steal the records.
And Fred, how do you tackle this? Do you create new business associate agreements? Do you what do you ask for here?
Well, I think it's people need to reevaluate how we've all been kind of viewing business associate agreements for the last 20 years as kind of it's a piece of paper. It's an exercise we go through to do our due diligence. We probably don't manage what we learn from those, that process of due diligence. We don't track risks that are associated with those vendors. We're probably not actually adding enough specific information in those based on the type of processing of EPHI that vendor may be doing. So start taking this entire part of your organization a lot more seriously. As you can see here, you've got a bigger exposure due to the security of your third parties than you do to your own exposure of your own infrastructure, especially if you're doing a good job managing it. So you're only as good as your partners.
Yep. And I do want to keep this in perspective, though. So here what we're looking at is hospital systems still have the most breaches. Specialty clinics are moving up. But when you look at, so one of the things HHS does is when you look at the numbers, it breaks it down by hospital systems, specialty clinics, services and supplies, physician group, behavioral health, home care, and outpatient. Let's keep the perspective here. Hospital systems have the most breaches. That is still where the majority of this happens. And Fred, when you see this and you want to keep that in perspective, it's not like hospitals can lower their guard or say, hey, we're only going to focus on business associates, right?
Well, I would agree, but I would also suggest that because the hospital systems are the primary responsible party to report a breach if a business associate, in fact, had a breach, they probably aggregate all of the mistakes or the breaches of their suppliers to flow up. So this could be a little bit off, but the obvious answer is the exposures of a hospital system are orders of magnitude larger than a business associate. You've got, medical devices operating wirelessly that are then connected directly to your EMR. You've got a million terminals all throughout a building that may not be occupied 24/7 that you can actually wander around and access particular terminals. So your exposures, your exposed attack surface is gigantic in a hospital system compared to a specialty clinic or a service provider or some organization that is a very narrowed focus set of things they do and systems they work with.
And John, speaking of specialty clinics, on this slide, the other thing that is, that sticks out is, holy moly, specialty clinics and supplies have had a big jump in the second half of the year. That they have the most breaches they've ever had. Why specialty clinics?
Well, you asked me a tough question. I'll play Houdini here, but certainly, I mean, there are a lot of them. To be honest with you, they are partnering with larger healthcare systems. So now there's more connectivity. They typically are not acquired. They want to stand alone, but they go into joint ventures with hospitals and healthcare systems, and so again, just more and more connectivity to me is what stands out. Now they're sharing data, they're connected, and so they become a target.
So let me point out something about this that jumps out at me, and it goes to the last comment I made about business associates being the unlocked window. So the one here that says services and supplies, while other subsectors have had increases, that one doubled, right? That's got fractionally the largest increase of anything on this page. And so, going for your, trying to get into your network through your toilet paper supplier or so, whatever. This is a trend that is spiking up. And this is why there's going to be new guidance coming out from the federal government and HHS directly having to do with managing third-party risk. There's going to be a whole bunch of new requirements, and they're going to get very specific and prescriptive about what to do here.
Yep, I see that coming. Mike, earlier you mentioned the common spirit breach.
Mm-hmm.
And, we want to specifically talk about that one because it was so big.
Yeah.
And it impacted so many patients. And in that case, definitely impacted patient care, as you saw from your local hospital. Can you take us through that one a little bit?
Sure. I mean, for what is known, they said that, that was a third party breach, right? So again, a business associate. There's other things that are classified as a third party breach, right? It can be some kind of supply chain thing where, like if you got a buggy update in a piece of software or something like that. But what they did is they took their EMR offline, and every hospital, this is what they said. Every hospital that was using it all of a sudden had no access to patient records. And that was a whole bunch of them, including mine, including others in the area, including some over in Seattle. And I know there's probably a lot of people on this in this meeting right now that have some kind of experience they can relate to that. Yes, a whole bunch of hospitals had to start diverting patients over to non-common spirit service institutions, and 600,000 people are apparently impacted by this. So again, free credit monitoring, wall of shame. But again, there are now, I hate to use the term, ambulance chasing attorneys that are waiting for these breaches to happen, because now you can pile on with not only the penalties from the California Consumer Privacy Act, California Privacy Rights Act, others that have come up in Virginia, Illinois, other places like that, but also the federal government. If you have made representations that you are compliant with requirements, and it is found by your insurance company or whoever is in there with toothpicks and Q-tips looking around that there were some non-compliance issues, then the False Claims Act is enforced, and it costs even more money. So the two lawsuits we know about now are both class actions, right? Attorneys went out and found somebody to be plaintiffs and filed a couple of lawsuits, and there will be more. So, this is almost the worst thing that could have happened, short of just having all those records destroyed.
And it's also worth always reminding people that HIPAA is the only law that says you do not need to show damage to actually bring a case and get damages paid to you. All you need to show is that your records were actually breached. So it's very unusual.
Well, there's another interesting thing to happen too, and that is if there is an event, a breach, things like that, someone internal to the organization can become a whistleblower and say, they weren't up to, they're not taking care of security properly. They're not doing that. And you don't have to have a specific fact, example, or piece of evidence to support that assertion. It is assumed, because there was the breach, that is true. So now we have whistleblowers who get paid for this stuff getting into the act as well. And that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declined to hear it. So that's going to stay in force.
And John, a question for you here. So one of the rural hospital IT directors I was talking to said about the common spirit breach, holy cow, like, when all these hospitals got together and there's this major national corporation, they have the money to buy any cybersecurity tool they want. They can go out and buy the best of the best, and they got breached. How do you look at that as, why them? Why do large organizations still get breached?
Yeah, and I think we kind of talked about it a little bit, kind of when we were referencing the Metapixel data breach that happened to Advocate. There's a lot of moving parts, and what I think is important is that you have mature governance. So, organizations like Common Spirit have a lot of shadow IT. We see more and more of that in organizations because of the consumerization of IT. It's easier, right? It used to be we were the guys with the tool belts and nobody else knew how to do this stuff, and now it's become simple. And so you get things like marketing teams that apply technology because they can, and they're not held to, a lot of times they're not held to the same standards as the internal IT team, and that can lead to that. So to me, the recommendation would really be trying to focus on a strong governance program internally, so that you're never going to get rid of shadow IT, but those folks need to be following the same policies and procedures and rules that we've set forth to the organization as IT gets dispersed outside of IT.
Yep, for sure. One of the, Fred, can you talk? So, we talk about the prepare, detect, respond methodology. Can you talk about how to think about these breaches and apply that?
Yeah. Well, the repair stage can be a number of things, but really, if you're talking about breaches, preparation is having your incident response plan, your policy that describes what is an incident, when do you call one. Your plan should be very well developed. It should speak to the systems and risks that you have, and it should have things like playbooks. In other words, you should have a very specific set of instructions for business email compromise, for a system beaconing out to command and control, to somebody with ransomware, right? So you should have a plan for every eventuality. And then you need to run exercises. If you're not running tabletop exercises, you're not going to be able to execute the plan. It's that simple. We find that probably one of the most impactful things in 2022 that we did was tabletop exercises. They were literally transformative to the organizations that we were doing them for. You learn so much by having to make decisions that could be existential. Literally, your company existence may hinge on some of these decisions. You do not want to be making those decisions in the middle of a panic, right? Make them beforehand, practice those things. Detect, obviously, is if you don't have visibility into what's going on and people watching it 24/7, you're driving down the freeway with a blindfold on, unfortunately. And if you don't have the ability to take rapid mitigation measures like rapidly quarantining systems, and then bringing to bear a incident response that has the right people, the right skills, the outsource skills you may need, having high-end forensic analysis tools is not something most people maintain. So having those assistants, the people you're going to reach out to, having them lined up and having contracts in place before something happens, this is all part of putting together a ability to get back up off the canvas if you've been hit and get back in the fight, right? So critical that you have really honed this to a fine art, everything I've mentioned here.
Yeah, and Mike, one of the things that is in the report, that's in the healthcare breach report, is HHS tackles these as what's a hacking incident, and when you see the report, it says most of the incidents continue to be hacking incidents. What's a hacking incident?
Well, I think there's generally two things they're talking about here, right? So first of all, it means somebody did this to you, right? It was intentional. Somebody got unauthorized access to your network, looked around, found good stuff, stole it, did whatever. And there's essentially, I'll say there's three ways that this happens routinely. Okay. Number one is somebody gives up a password and there's no multi-factor authentication, or they defeat multi-factor authentication, which we've seen happen up close. And it happens extremely quickly. And they are then in the network and they escalate privileges and they find the stuff. Okay. So number one, somebody on the inside is gullible, all right, and helps out a criminal. Number two, you have something facing the internet that needs an update that did not get its update. And so yesterday's news was Community Health Systems was lost 1 million records. Okay, this is announced yesterday, and it was in their 8K filing. And the way that they did that was there was a file transfer system that they use for a secure file transfer, and it was vulnerable, and they didn't patch it, and bam, there you go. Right? So gullible person gives up a password. You have something unpatched that gets exploited. And then number three is if I can get you to drive your browser over to my rigged website, maybe that's through a redirect that I've put somewhere. Maybe it's because I sent you a link in email and you just hit every link you get in email or, on your phone or whatever. And then the website is rigged. And it throws a little something on you that then turns into a downloader, which downloads something else, and that gives someone access. So those are essentially three ways. When they're talking about hacking, that's what they're talking about. So if you were going to address those things, what are you going to do, right? You're going to cut your people off from the internet, right? And I know a few people that have done this, and that moves the needle more than anything else, right? Just all personal use has to be on a personal device, and if you don't need email on the outside, you don't get it. Okay, and then keeping your stuff patched, and especially if the stuff facing the internet happens to be on the Homeland Security, the CISA list of commonly exploited vulnerabilities. Commonly exploited means commonly exploited. If you have that stuff, you really got to pay attention to that. And Fred actually wrote a paper on treating a high severity vulnerability that's been announced that affects you as an incident. You activate your incident response right then and there to get that thing patched, because
Yep.
nothing else matters at that point.
Yep, for
So
sure.
that's hacking.
So I know there are folks who are going to want the report, and we had an experience last year that I want to relate to everybody, and that is we sent out the report, and some folks looked at it and gave it to their boards, or gave it to their one thing I'm thinking of in particular, where somebody gave it to the chairman of the board, and the chairman of the board said, "Oh, breaches are down. We don't necessarily need to worry about this anymore." And as we've talked about for the last 50 minutes, no, that's not the case. So what we'd like to do this time is, let's talk about how your organization should put the report into context. Mike and I, or Mike, or just me, will sit down with you and your team to talk about the report and how it impacts your organization. And happy to do it with your board, happy to do it with just you. And you can email Ellie at criticalinsight.com. She'll do the calendar ping pong, or we'll reach out to you to see if you would like to do this. But we want you to have the report, but we want to make sure that it has the context that it needs this time, as we give it out. I do want to ask one more question here, and then we'll go to final thoughts, and that is cyber insurance. Cyber insurance continues to be one of the hottest topics, and they're putting up. It has changed so dramatically. Fred, can you just give people an update on why cyber insurance has gotten so much more expensive, and the kinds of questionnaires we're seeing and the kinds of changes we're seeing there?
Yeah, well, the obvious reason is the insurance company is getting murdered by the payouts. They literally cannot survive another year like last year, right? So they're having to manage their risks. They're trying to understand it. Here's the one that got me, one of the newest ones, or two of them. We've always said, when they say, do you have MFA, that does not mean do you have MFA for O365 only. It means do you have MFA everywhere it's risky, meaning any software as a service, anytime you're connecting to any system with admin level privileges, anytime you're connecting to the VPN. It's really MFA everywhere except when you're signing in locally to the system that you're working on, right? So that's what MFA and the insurance companies are saying. No, it's not just do you have MFA? Do you have MFA everywhere you need it? And then the second one is you need to have a register of every single service account in your organization and the privileges associated to each one of those. What they're looking for is service accounts with domain admin or admin level privileges, because no matter how many times a vendor tells you, oh yeah, it runs as DA, the reality is it can always run way lower privileges. Nobody spent the time and effort to actually figure out what those minimum level privileges are. This is going to be a transformative effort, and I think most people are not ready for this.
And John, as you think about how cyber insurance and the questionnaires and regulation, or I guess de facto cyber insurance has become de facto regulator. How does that change the conversation inside a hospital or any healthcare organization?
Yeah, I think certainly the requirement of insurance is key, and I think that's important. My big concern is that you use it as a false sense of security, and there's certainly good things about it, but as we talked about earlier, really do the math. If you're carrying $10 million worth of cyber insurance, that could just be a drop in the bucket if your EMR gets compromised, and you've got hundreds of thousands of records that get breached. And so, again, I think it's great to be there, but it needs to be right-sized for your organization, and really do the math on, shift that thinking from not if we get compromised, but when we get compromised, and make sure that you're asking those questions and really reviewing that to make sure it's going to be enough in the time of need.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I add probably a competing piece of information here? I actually think that so what we see is a trend of going through business associates, third party supply chain, blah 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 blah, right? And so there's going to be an increased focus on how you do third party risk management. Well, if in your business associate agreements you require cyber insurance, just like we said, now all of the insurance companies are holding everyone to a standard to provide that insurance. So, if your business associates say, yes, we have cyber insurance, they've had to meet some bar. And so rather than you enforcing that, the insurance companies are enforcing that. And because third party access is a trend, that's actually moving the needle in a positive way, although this is not the intended way that anybody thought it was going to happen.
Yep, for sure. Okay, before we get to final thoughts here, my colleague Ginny is going to put a survey in the chat. We always appreciate when folks take the survey. It helps us know, hey, was this good? Did you get a lot out of this? And give us feedback on it. It's very, very important to what we do to make sure that we get feedback from our audience here. So thank you very much. And thank you. I see some folks commenting, as we go here. And if anyone has last minute questions, go ahead and put them in the chat here. And I'll make sure we get them here in the next minutes. But let's do final thoughts. And as we do final thoughts, one of the things I'm going to put up is, Fred had talked about before, some of the most impactful services we've done in the last year. One of them is obviously those tabletop exercises, but we watch networks 24/7. We help folks prepare for attacks, and we help them respond rapidly. We're going to do final thoughts here. John, Fred, and then Mike. John, go ahead. Final thoughts.
I think when I look at this report, and again, overall, we see the number of incidents is down, but the number of records breached is up. Certainly, diligence is key. I like to prepare, detect, respond, and the biggest part is prepare and having those conversations internally. And planning is important, and I would say there's no time to relax, because we're not seeing we're seeing an increase in activity from nation state actors and others that have the resources to continue to dig deeper and make it more of a challenge. So no time to relax.
Yeah, Fred, final thoughts.
Yeah, I would suggest people need to really think holistically about these major pillars of their security program. The incident response one that kind of what we were talking about before is a perfect example. If you have a hole from the planning through the detection through the response phase, you need to fill that, and you need to practice that process beginning to end. So that's what it takes: practice, practice, practice.
Mike, final thoughts.
Okay, so the trends we see: criminals are going down market and to business associates. Okay, so third-party risk is an area that needs increased focus. Requiring cyber insurance in your business associate agreements is a good idea, right? Because you will inherit what the insurance company made them do. And there are more regulations coming. There is going to be more guidance coming from HHS and others. And I know the boards of directors don't understand all this. So if it's relevant, let us talk to your board.
Awesome. All right. And to that end, as I said, we're happy to give out the report. It would be helpful, we think, to organizations to do it with a conversation. Either we'll reach out to you, or you can email us, and we'll set that up. We look forward to talking to you about it. And give it the context that you need for your organization. So thank you very much to John Delano for joining us, to Fred, to Mike, and thank you to all of you for joining us for this for the Healthcare Breach Report for 2022. Thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon. Bye bye.
Yep. Thanks everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.